to what you were saying, what we actually see so many times is we see God to the rescue, God to the rescue, God to the rescue. But when his rescue is judgment and condemnation, we somehow don't relate that. We don't seem to realize that to save something, you often have to kill what is trying to destroy that something. You know, doing something part-time doesn't always give you the ROI, the return on investment that you were hoping, because
hey, before we jump into the podcast, we want to thank all our donors and supporters who make the Today Count show possible. It's through your generosity that we're able to shape leaders through this content and this podcast. And be sure to like, subscribe, and follow wherever you find yourself coming across this content. All right, let's get to the podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Today Count show. I have with me today Pastor Winston Harris, and it's just going to be the two of us today in the Genesis Project. We have parachuted into the story of history, the history of the Bible in the 19th chapter of Genesis. And if you've been following along with us, we left off where Abraham was interceding for this city. He was pleading, negotiating, I guess you could even say, with with the Lord, that he would have mercy, upon the city. That was an interesting discussion. Winston, today we're going to be looking at the absolute destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and I thought maybe we could talk about some of the high points of this 19th chapter before we read through it. But one of the things that struck me so far in our reading of Genesis is, though it has been filled with beauty, there's sure been a lot of God's judgment, in it. We have the fall where God curses, man's work, the planet itself, childbirth. You have that going on. Then, we have the flood. Then we have Tower of Babel, where he mixes up language. I would call it, software problems, where, today when our software doesn't work, our whole life gets crazy. And so if you can't communicate, that's not a good thing. And now we get to this place where God is destroying an entire city. It kind of makes you wonder, what this is telling us about God. I've even heard people say they don't like the God of the Old Testament. I mean, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, where my mind goes specifically, with the flood. Here we see, God executing judgment on this city. Immediately, my mind goes to the God of the New Testament as a gardener, in that he's constantly pruning, he's constantly removing what doesn't bear fruit, he's constantly making way for life. And I think that's the tension that an unbeliever and a believer has to acknowledge and live in, is that much like the physical reality of a garden, one of the ways that you make way for life is removing things that are an obstacle to life. If there are things that are not conducive to a healthy environment, you have to confront that. You have to address that. Whether we're talking about leadership in the workplace or in our homes or in our own personal life, leading ourselves. I think you can even drill it down or bring it back into those realities, right? Are we willing to confront things that are not creating room for development, or not creating room for growth, or not allowing us to think differently? God here in the Old Testament, there's a physical expression of a spiritual reality, which is in order for an environment to create life, there seems to have to be death. There seems to have to be something that is required to die. And I think we see that theme throughout the scriptures, and there's the echo of the gospel in there. Something has to die in order for something to live.
Wow. My mind did not go there. That's I would move immediately to the pragmatics that working with leaders as my calling. You just mentioned something that I think we all struggle with. We add quickly, but we don't eliminate in order to add, effectively. And doing something part time doesn't always give you the ROI, the return on investment that you were hoping, because what we reap, what we sow. What we reap is directly related to the amount and the quality of what we sow. Where my mind went, which is not certainly not better than your idea, is just my mind went to, it's a worldview question, and it's a difficult question, but whether someone realizes or not, everybody has a worldview. And in that sense, everybody's a follower of something. They're following a worldview. So if they choose to believe that there is no God, and then they're going to live in such a way where they're not even going to ask these kinds of questions. If you believe there's a God, and then though it might be a scary question to ask, is this how God deals with our failures? Is this what it what it looks like? To what you were saying, what we actually see so many times is we see God to the rescue, God to the rescue, God to the rescue. But when his rescue is judgment and condemnation, we somehow don't relate that. We don't seem to realize that to save something, you often have to kill what is trying to destroy that something, and thus war, right? And of course, everybody has their view, on that. And then there's that interesting part too, where, Lot, who has seen the hand of God, chooses the best land closest to the city, and eventually gets intertwined in the city. And apparently, based upon the chapter before, there weren't enough people in Sodom and Gomorrah, because the conversation between Abraham and the Lord was, he was very willing to be merciful. And and like we joked about last time, he already knew how many faithful people there were. So, God really wasn't negotiating when you think about it. He already knew. He already knew what was going to happen, and so did the angels. The angels that we're going to read about in this story saved the lives of Lot's family, because I don't think they were going to leave. It sure didn't look like it. I mean, when we're going to read this, he literally, I think, grabs them and chases them out, of the city. Then we're going to read about Lot's wife, who obviously loved Sodom because she looked back longing and saddened, by what was going to happen. So her viewpoint wasn't, it's about time God clean house here. That wasn't her
Right.
viewpoint. Her viewpoint was lost. She was going to lose something.
You pulled on a thread that I've been, I think personally considering, especially, reading through this. I think we can often have an incomplete view of who God is and lose the appreciation for who he is in respect to who we are. And what I mean by that is, if we don't acknowledge the God who is capable of judgment and condemnation, then we can't truly appreciate the God of grace and love and mercy. And so if we only think of God in this, grace and love and warm fuzzies, then we almost depreciate that same grace and love, and it starts to slip into entitlement, and like we deserve certain things, and it leads us into this kind of posture where we almost expect God to respond to our desires and the way that we think our life should look, versus understanding that no, I don't deserve anything that God actually gives me, but because I know his full character is that he is holy and that he is pure and that he is righteous. And so anything that is not that, he has to address, but he's addressed it through Christ. So now if I have that, kind of understanding, I can truly appreciate that grace is a gift. And if we draw that parallel to leadership, I think if we only think leadership is about winning and we think leadership is about the trophies and the whatever your benchmarks and your successes and making money and building things, but we don't see the totality of the failures and the difficulties and the hard conversations and the things that have to happen, and we have an incomplete view of leadership and our assignments and responsibilities, then we depreciate the value of the roles and the seats that we sit in as well. And so I think those things can also be, threaded, maybe not immediately and directly, but I think there's a thread there.
Yeah, I feel like you're almost bringing up, the idea of humanism, and the question is, what do we hold in the highest regard? Humanity, our love for our brother, which we should hold in high regard, or God, or I think sometimes I see this version of humanism is, God, just let us do what we want to do. This is our earth. You made us and you gave us dominion over this. So we're just going to do, you do God, we'll do us. But if we are in trouble, hopefully you'll answer the door. We'll need you then. We'll need you when we don't have a solution or an answer. But then when we get involved in destructive manners and God comes in and cleans up the house, we don't like that.
Compartmentalizing God.
Yeah. In fact, that's a word that I had in the back of my mind, compartmentalizing him. So that's what we're going to read about. We're going to read about these angels. They come to the gate. Lot meets them. There's a big old thing that happens hours after that. And then there is the running for their lives, literally, although the angels kind of had a light of fire underneath them to run. And then there's the discussion about even where they're going to run to. And then, of course, we have that famous part where Lot's wife looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. So why don't we dive in and see what else we would pick out of it. So I'm reading in the New Living Translation. I'll try to read it in the way that if you're driving in your car or you're walking or exercising or cleaning the house or whatever, that hopefully it won't be too herky-jerky and you can kind of follow the narrative. Genesis 19, beginning in verse 1, says, that evening the two angels came to the entrance of the city of Sodom, and Lot was sitting there as they arrived. I think Lot was sitting there because he had influence in the city, and I believe that officials of the city kind of sat there almost as judges or whatnot, to help the people. So he did rise in influence. When he saw them, when Lot saw the angels, he stood up next to them. Then he welcomed them and bowed low to the ground. My lords, he said, come to my home to wash your feet and be my guests for the night. You may then get up in the morning as early as you like and be on your way again. Oh, no, they said, we'll just spend the night out here in the city square. I've always wondered, when angels do walk the streets of our cities, do they have needs? Do they have human physical needs? I mean, that's just a fleeting thought.
I mean, if we want to bring up a previous conversation of the Nephilim, I mean,
yeah,
it's interesting that, when you're going to continue to read on, I mean, they're going to sit down and eat and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Which is interesting, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's mysterious. It makes me even more curious, as to God's creation. And then I'm at verse 3 now. So the the angel said, no, we're going to stay out here in the city square. But Lot insisted. So at last they went home with him. They finally gave in. And he set a great feast before them, complete with fresh bread made without yeast. After the meal, as they were preparing to retire for the night, All the men of Sodom, again, I'm wondering, do angels need to sleep? All the men of Sodom, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. Word spread, I guess. Somebody observed something. Verse 5 says, they shouted to Lot, where are the men who came to spend the night with you? And this to me is just so bizarre. Bring them out so we can have sex with them. What was the what was the attraction here? What was the I can't think that it was anything other than demonic influences of some sort. That's just my running commentary, I guess. Verse 6, Lot stepped outside to talk to them, shutting the door behind them. Please, my brothers, he begged me, don't do such a wicked thing. And then the next statement blows my mind. Look, Lot says, I have 2 virgin daughters. Do with them as you wish, but leave these men alone, for they are under my protection. I just got to pause there, and I'm just wondering what is going on. You have homosexuality, you have a perverted sexual drive, but this is even more than that.
Yeah. The way that I saw this, I guess a little bit beyond that, to your point, it was almost like their righteousness, because they had to know, they had to see something was different about these 2 angels, just like Lot seems to know that there's something different about these 2 angels. So it's almost like their righteousness. We could also call it their leadership, because they will end up leading Lot and his family out of this place. The phrase I got is, it demanded a response, right? Something about them demanded a response. It demanded a response of Lot. His response, he ends up bowing down. He ends up trying to serve them, trying to prepare a space for them. But it also warranted another response, this abusive, to your point, demonic, a dark response. And so I just, initially looking at this, thought it was interesting that their presence demanded a response. It wasn't, nothing was casual about this interaction. Nobody was like, oh, all right, yeah, they're just some visitors, right? Like, and they didn't demand the response, but something about them caused a visceral response from both Lot and from the men of Sodom. I thought that was interesting.
I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think of that. I think that's brilliant, because I think it's just like the name of Jesus. It's like the name of Jesus, the story of Jesus, the claims of Jesus. It demands a response. You can't simply
Ignore
it. It demands a response, and this is kind of a reflection of Jesus, where these angels are coming. Yes, they're bringing destruction, but they've got salvation in mind. They've got who can they help, in mind. That's always going to be, the leaning indicator of heaven. It's going to be to rescue, to redeem, to make right, and that's really good. It demands a response. I did not think about that.
And I just thought it was interesting. I mean, we kind of see this, this the difference in response. One is a humility. Lot is like, I can't help but acknowledge. I can't help but lower myself. I can't help but to figure out, how to be hospitable. But then those who are in opposition to the assignment of these visitors, right? They wanted to impose their will. They wanted to humiliate. They wanted to abuse, right? And to your point, right? We end up seeing that played out in the gospel. But even in modern day, right? If you choose to stand up for something that is right, good, pure, moral, in 2025, seemingly you're going to be met with opposition. It's going to warrant and demand a response. People are going to want to humiliate you. People are going to want to come up against your character, your personhood. However, people can quote unquote cancel you or discourage or destroy you, they will if you choose to take a stand, if you choose to be on mission, to have a conviction in 2025. You can expect a response is going to come.
When I was a teenager and my mom was paying me to read the Gospel of John and the book of Proverbs, those two in particular, I, I, I was always dumbfounded by how much Proverbs warns about evil men who are plotting, these dark things. And in my, my boyish wisdom or, lack thereof, my experience, I never saw that. I never saw bad guys hiding in the bushes. I never saw, people conspiring to kill somebody. I never experienced that. Now at 65, what I did I think there were when I was a little boy, did I think there were boogeymen, so to speak? Yes, of course. Did I think that the grouchy neighbor over there might be a bad guy? Yeah, of course, but not to the extreme that Proverbs talks about. Now at 65, I know that there are evil. There is evil, and it is super dark, and it will. And I know this doesn't sound really encouraging, but kind of what you were saying about appreciating God's grace and mercy, sometimes what it takes to understand the beauty of God's creation, what needs to be protected, the innocence, that this is God declares war. He declares war because there is a darkness that is attempting to further the destruction, whereas God is wanting to redeem. But I don't know why I struggled with Proverbs that way, because even when I was a lot younger and had a paper route, there was this housing development. I think it was like a big apartment complex, and these boys would we're talking boys, right? I mean, I'm not sure how old I was. 10, maybe I was 10. And so these boys who were maybe 10, 11, and 12, 8 of them, 10 of them, 12 of them, something like that. They knew when I was coming through to deliver papers, and they weren't there all the time, but they were hiding, and they got a kick out of chasing me down. Now, they never caught me, but I remember my heart racing because I'm going, are they here today? Are they here today? So I don't know why I could not translate that little boy evil into the fact that those boys are growing up someday. And why would that be childish play when someone could get, really hurt? And I knew that some of them had spent time in juvenile hall. So yeah. Oh, and then, okay. So here's the thought I had. See what you think. So then we have Lot literally offering up his daughters to this mob, this crazy mob. And I began to think about it. Well, wait a second. Lot's history. Now, again, I don't want to throw him completely under the bus, but he pales in manhood and in godliness next to his uncle. He's nothing compared to Abraham. And what we learn about Lot in the story of Abraham and Lot up to this point is he was a pragmatist. He wasn't an idealist. He wasn't altruistic. He was a pragmatist. That's why he chose the better parts of the region versus honoring his uncle, who basically gave him life, and he's the one who made him rich. He couldn't even do that. Then, of course, he moves closer to a metropolitan area where he could have more conveniences. And again, that's pragmatism. And so what he does see is that these angels, in his view, had to be protected at all cost. And so that's the only thing I can come up with, is that certainly he loved his daughters, but I guess there was a hierarchy of theology in his head somewhere where it would have been worse to turn over the angels than to give away his daughters. I don't know if you've come up with anything better.
I mean, yeah, no, I would agree. I can't fathom what would drive you.
You have two little girls.
yeah, I can't even conceptualize how you would arrive at that being even an option. Like you can't. I mean, I'm sure surely you have goats and you have any other resources that you could offer up, and he went immediately to that. It's
You know, and
dumbfounding.
yeah, an idealist would draw a sword and tell your wife and girls to draw swords and the angels to draw swords and whomever, the cook, the baker, the candlestick maker, and maybe spill enough blood to where they back off. I mean, that's what an idealist would do. That's what an altruistic, you get to a point where no, you can't surrender anybody in there. Now, humanism would throw the old guy over, right? So I don't know. It's interesting. We learn a lot about ourselves in high moments of stress.
Mm.
And I wonder later on in Lot's life if he ever kind of rewound that and thought about that. He had the ability to do that. I don't know if he did. Now, he did get some of Abraham's, I think, in his DNA, some of his self-preserving skills, if you will. Self-preservation is what I'm trying to say, skills.
Yeah.
But
I think if so where you triggered a thought from me with the evil lurking in men and your response to Proverbs, I feel like I have a similar thought when it comes to like pray for your enemies and how we ought to treat our enemies. And I think the word enemy is has this word picture of like this grand opposition, but how many of us live a life that's even worth a grand opposition? And so surely, the Spirit of God is not expecting every single Christian and every single person to have such an assignment and such a ministry that man, there's just all these enemies that I have. And so I think about, when the guy asked Jesus, well, who's my neighbor? I kind of think about that. Well, who's my enemy?
mm,
And I even get into that space of like, the Bible and though we believe this really happened, right? The Bible is often painting these grand pictures about subtle truths and subtle realities in our Christian life, and so that's where my mind also goes. Is can we find Lot? Can we find ourselves in Lot? And
yeah,
are there's these subtle moments where we're willing to sacrifice things that we say we would never sacrifice? These
yeah.
things that are so pure and so precious. But to your point, when we get into a circumstance that we didn't plan for, and there's a lot of pressure, we find ourselves making decisions that we would never make otherwise.
Yeah, it's scary to know what we're capable of doing under great pressure, for sure. And we certainly approach these scriptures with humility. I mean, if Lot walked in the studio right now, I think I would have enough confidence to say, "What were you thinking?" Help me understand that. But I would probably honestly be more curious because I wasn't there, and we're reading this text, and you get the feeling of this is like 30 seconds, 5 minutes, but who knows how long this was going on? I mean, who knows? And I think that without humility, if Lot were to walk in here and we gave him a microphone and he joined this, he says, "All right, dudes, let me tell you what was happening here. Yes, I regret that. Yes, but did you know this? Did you, because the scripture doesn't always tell us everything we want to know. It'd probably just be too thick. we, we'd never get through it.
There have been seasons in my life where I've looked back and I thought, what was that even about? Did I grow in that season? Did I get better? Am I still stuck in that season? If you have similar thoughts, I want to introduce you to a book called Story, The Art of Learning from Your Past. This book, written by Jim Piper, shares principles and stories that actually help us get unstuck and step into the future we've always wanted. Be sure to stop by leadtodaycommunity.com to grab your copy today.
So, all right. So Lot's trying to negotiate with this mob. I think that's funny in and of itself. So the angels take over. In verse 9, it says, the angel said, "Stand back," they shouted. In verse 9, by the way. "Who do you think you are?" Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the angels. This is the mob. Stand back, they shouted. Who do you think you are? We let you settle among us, and now you are trying to tell us what to do. We'll treat you far worse than those other men. And they lunged at Lot and began breaking down the door. But the two angels, this is where I thought I was, but the two angels reached out and pulled Lot in and bolted the door. Then they blinded the men of Sodom so they couldn't find the doorway. What did that look like? Verse 12. So then the angels turn to Lot, perhaps maybe Lot and his family. Do you have any other relatives here in the city? The angels asked. Get them out of this place. Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else, for we will destroy the city completely. I really love this picture of God's grace, Winston, because the conversation in the previous chapter had to do with faithful people, good people. And that is not a qualifier here. He basically saying, who do you care about? Right? Who do you care about? Whether they are God-fearers or not, go get them, for we will destroy the city completely. The stench, here we go. Now we get a hint. The stench of the place has reached the Lord, and he has sent us to destroy it.
What a word picture. It reached it reached God.
Yeah.
The brokenness. I'm in the NLT, looking at this in the NLT. The outcry is what mine says. I think about in Exodus. The cries of God's people reached him, and that's when he meets Moses. He calls Moses in the burning bush, right? I think once again this picture of grace and mercy mixed in with judgment, right? Like God, this circumstance warranted a response from God.
That's really, man, that's insightful. Almost like what you were saying, that the angel's presence propositioned a response, and the character of God, we are testing God when we do whatever the blank we want to do, and he does nothing. Wow.
And I think if we're honest, unconsciously and for sure, there are those of us that consciously live like God is soft, and like God, if he does exist, quote unquote, where is he, right? You see that on the cross, people mocking God. If you're who you say you are, come down and save yourself, right? Like, and no, you do not understand the totality of who he is and his grace and his mercy. But also he is fully God, and he responds to darkness.
I'm only smiling because I thought of family vacation, my family vacation.
That's a hard shift. Family vacation.
No, well, just wait. Because we're talking about, testing God and the stench, of God to where, enough is enough, kind of like that Pi, cartoon. And I don't know if you watched Pi or if it was even on TV when you were a kid, but I didn't think it was the greatest cartoon in the world, but sometimes that's all that was on. And once Pi got beat up enough, or once the evil was big enough or bad enough, he would eat a can of spinach and then would become Pi the Sailor Man and beat everybody up. Well, I was the eldest of four, and back in the day when we would go on vacation, we would drive in a station wagon or a Volkswagen bus, and we'd be driving across country. And most of the cars in those days did not have air conditioning. I mean, that was an option that you would, put in your car when you went to go buy one. And so, sometimes miserable, and we'd all be sitting on the same bench seat in the back, poking each other, fighting for space. And mom would say, knock it off, kids. And dad would say, knock it off, kids. And of course, I'm giving you the vanilla version of this. And then after a while, where we just totally ignored our parents and someone starts crying or whatever, my dad's patience finally ended. And once he pulled over, we all knew we were dead meat. We were dead meat. How long can you push, against what God has said and what God has designed, and not expect? I mean, if there is a God and he's not dead, and it'd be pretty tempting to believe there is no God and he is dead, if there was no repercussions for how we live. But we know that's not true. So Lot was in control. Then the mob was in control. And then the angels stepped in. The ambassadors of heaven stepped in. And that's where the story takes that hard right turn. Anything else you want to say before we continue reading?
Yeah, let's jump in.
All right. So let's see. So Lot rushed out to tell his daughter's fiancés, quick, get out of the city. The Lord is going to destroy it. But the young men thought he was only joking. So, they were watching Monday Night Football or something. And Lot comes busting down the door. We got to get out of here. God's going to destroy Sodom. Verse 25. At dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. So that mob must have blindly
Disbanded.
Some maybe still out in the streets looking for their plan.
Imagine Lot is just kind of running by them, and they're just kind of like, he's like, man, I hope they don't hear me.
There you go. Yeah, it's like Marco Polo. Do you know what that is? Marco Polo. Yeah. Okay. It's really a game of Marco Polo outside of the water. All right. So at dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. Hurry, they said to Lot, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. Get out of here right now, or you will be caught in the destruction of the city. I wonder how many of us get caught because we're in the wrong place, in our mind, in our heart, physically. That's something I wrote in the margin of my Bible. Proverbs tells you not to walk by certain neighborhoods, not even walk by it. James tells you to run from evil, run from temptation. Verse 16, when Lot still hesitated, you referred to that before we started the podcast, I think, or at the front end, I don't remember. When Lot still hesitated, here again, we see the grace of God. The angel seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters and rushed them to safety outside the city. I think we can literally and accurately say drag them out, for the Lord was merciful. Run for your lives, the angels warned. Do not stop anywhere in the valley and don't look back. Escape to the mountains or you will die. I'm going to pause there because apparently Lot still isn't listening, because then he wants to get into a discussion about it. Any thoughts about that section there?
I mean, I just think Lot still hesitating is kind of almost a comical statement after everything that has already ensued up until this point. What would cause you to question or hesitate anything that's happening other than you need to live? Like, it's pretty clear what needs to happen, yet Lot still can't resist. And I think you mentioned this, that he kind of has one foot in, one foot out. Like, he seems to be wanting to serve the angels and wants to follow, maybe in Abraham, maybe wants to kind of follow in his footsteps. There's reference points that maybe Lot is wanting to be that type of man, but then there still seems to be this, this pull, this draw, this entertaining, the city, entertaining this place, trying to barter with these, with the mob, trying to negotiate this situation. And it's pretty clear this situation is far beyond negotiation, but he's still trying to figure out, okay, wait, how can I make all this work? How can I still make this a win-win, if you will? And it's like, there's no wins here. There's a decision. And so I just think that hesitation is really interesting, because there's nothing to hesitate about.
Yeah, the thing I thought about was what I think is a universal principle. And I think that principle is grafted into creation. But I think the whole counsel of Scripture would back it up and teach it. And that's this: to be successful at anything, it's an all-in proposition. And it's a discriminating process where sometimes you're not choosing between evil and good, like it's pretty obvious that Lot is. Sometimes it's saying, I've just got too many things in my life, and when I do an inventory of them, none of them individually are evil in and of themselves, but they are encumbrances. They are weight, they are obstacles, they are unrealistic, for me, a humanoid, given the years I have and the abilities that I have. What does God require of me? Why am I here? And focus, on that. And I was just simply following your narrative, where I think you're right. I think he wanted it all. He wanted it all. He still wanted to keep his land. He didn't want to give up his land, but his land was going to be destroyed because of its proximity, to Sodom. So he became homeless in that sense. Yeah, that hesitation.
I think as you're talking in real time, I'm thinking about, oftentimes do we hesitate because we've invested in places that are too close to the line, that we've spent our time or our energy or our thought, or we've committed to things that have put us too close to the line, and now we have to backtrack. Now we have to start over, and we know, I'm kind of close, but if I can just manage this, if I can just, oftentimes people say, if I can just get through this season, right? If I can, once
I've never said that. I'm just joking, everybody.
but it is that, like, that hesitation where you probably need to make a change, but you don't. You're still trying to negotiate with this reality instead of taking action. And because the Lord's merciful, he drags us out of there. He gives us the opportunity to escape, if we choose to take it.
It's amazing what we get out of Scripture when we get to be in this kind of an environment. This is kind of how I see conversations going on in the temple area. With the early Jews, they would go to synagogue, and then they would kind of gather, in a place kind of like this, where we're doing the exposition. I don't think there was a lot of exposition that went on, in the temple. It was more structured, but outside of the temple, there was a lot of discussion. What did we learn from it? And I really enjoy this. This is it's different than teaching. It's just as some of the things that you've said today, I didn't think about, and it just adds richness if you can be in a place, or even those of you listening, keep coming back, tell others about it, and participate in a way that is comfortable for you, so that you can think about what's being said, and who knows what ideas that you come up with and how you relate it to your life. So in verse 18, even though the angels are jumping up and down, doing backflips, screaming, I can just see the veins. I'm assuming angels have veins. I have no idea. I'm just seeing the veins popping out of the angel's neck, saying, "Run, run, run! Don't look back." And then what's the response? Hold on, guys. This is Lot. "Oh no, my lords, please," Lot begged. "You have been so kind to me and saved my life. and you have granted me such mercy. But I cannot go to the mountains. Disaster would catch up to me there, and I would soon die. See, there is a small village nearby, nearby. Please let me go there instead. Don't you see how small it is? Then my life will be saved. The angel says, and I was a little shocked on this. All right, the angel said, I will grant your request. I will not destroy that little village. So I think the bomb radius, if you will, was probably going to consume that village. That's what I'm kind of gathering by the angel's response. But hurry, for I can do nothing until you are there. Whew. In other words, it's going to stop right at the front gate. All right. From that time on, that village was known as Zoar. The sun was rising as Lot reached the village. Then the Lord rained down fire and burning sulfur from the heavens on Sodom and Gomorrah. I wonder how that started. Did it start like as a sprinkle rain and then a downpour and then hail? And then all of a sudden it did something that they'd never seen before, like a volcanic eruption? Was there a volcano in the area? Or was this just something unheard of? Was it lightning strikes? My mind gets all crazy. Verse 25, he utterly destroyed them along with the other cities and villages of the plain, eliminating all life, people, plants, and animals alike. And then we get to this weird text in verse 26. But Lot's wife looked back as she was following along behind, and she became a pillar of salt. I think how a lot of people misread that verse is probably the way I did when I can remember again when I was younger. What I assumed at this point was that while they were running, the thunder began and the lightning struck, and however you're visualizing this. And then that would cause you, to turn around and go, whoa. But when you read this carefully, it's interesting where Moses decided to put this verse, because you would think in context, he would have put it after verse 22, something like, but Lot's wife didn't make it because on the way, she looked back with a longing heart of what she was, blah, blah, blah. But because it's put right here and you read it too quickly, you can think, oh, it was all of the ruckus that was going on that caused it. And so that doesn't seem fair. And then verse 27 says, the next morning, Abraham was up early with his Starbucks and, and hurried out to the place where he had stood in the Lord's presence. He looked out across the plain to Sodom and Gomorrah and saw columns of smoke and fumes, as from a furnace rising from the cities there. But God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities on the plain. I wonder what was going through Abraham's mind when he, looked at that. He was obviously on higher ground. Well, maybe not, but in my mind, he's looking down from a slope of some sort, and seeing the destruction.
Yeah, that Lot's wife looking back, I think that's for the longest time how I've interpreted or saw, thought, or visualized that, to your point, that it was unfair to be punished, quote unquote, just for looking back, right? Like, it wasn't like she seemingly did anything. Like, what if she had a crick in her neck and she just, happened to just turn it, like,
or curiosity that maybe other people were, running too.
Yeah, it just didn't seem like being turned into a pillar of salt warranted that from her response. But once again, this exaggerated story, this exaggerated reality that is supposed to teach us, this principle. And maybe some people are, what am I supposed to learn from this? Recently I was reading through Luke 9, and Jesus himself says, no one who puts a hand to the plow looks back is fit for service in the kingdom. And before that, there's actually a story of three people that Jesus interacts with, and Jesus is essentially calling them to follow him, and they all have a different reason why they will follow him ultimately. But first, they need to do other things, and ultimately, it becomes relationship. One guy wants to say bye to his family. Another guy says he wants to bury his father, but culturally, he wanted to receive the inheritance of burying his father as the firstborn son. So what sounded, once again, genuine and heartfelt was actually a motive of, let me be financially secure, then I'll follow you, Jesus. And then the other one was, I'll follow you if it's comfortable, because Jesus tells him, I have no place to lay my head, right? Foxes have dens, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And so my mind goes to, it wasn't the fact that she looked back, it was representation of what ended up probably happening, in her heart, that she was longing.
That she never left.
There you go. That there was a longing for what was, that there was a mispriority. Like she was not interested in what God was doing, where she was being led. She was not, to your point, all in, right? And so this is less about the physical looking back, and it was more a representation of, where was she, right? Where was she? She was not.
Yeah. So Winston, let's wrap it up with a recap of maybe the big ideas, stated the way we've already stated them, or even stated differently, and we can just kind of ping pong back and forth as they come to us. I want to point out your point that the angel's presence, how did you say it, required a response?
It demanded a response.
Demanded a response. And I think the application for us today is that this incredible story, that is a microcosm. It's I don't want to take this too far, but it is a early picture of what was to come. That is the same thing, where we have to make a decision what we believe about Christ, because again, whether we realize it or not, believer, seeker, or unbeliever, is that we have a worldview, and we follow that worldview. Do we serve humanity because we lift humanity above all things, or do we serve humanity because humanity was made in the image and the likeness of God? And are there instructions in how we are to serve and live among one another? I think those are some of the implications there. While you're thinking, I thought of also that having a foot in both worlds, whatever that means, if you want to take the spiritual perspective, a foot as a believer, but a foot in the world where, as you were kind of wrapping up your thoughts in the chapter about following, okay, I'm going to follow, but first, I got to do this. And again, there is a high bar, but I think success in anything, success in football and keeping your yard nice, in a relationship, in your job, whatever it is, it takes an all-out, full-on, effort.
Yeah, and I think we also talked about essentially addition by subtraction, understanding that I can't be committed to everything. I have to be committed to something, and do the uncomfortable work of cutting away what needs to be cut away, so that, to your point, I can find life, I can find flourishing, in the specific direction I'm supposed to go.
So I read a funny. I'm going to end with this illustration, and if you have something that you want to end the episode with, feel free. I'll see if I can do this decently. I read an email/article today that brought up the 5-second rule. Do you know what the 5-second rule is, Winston?
You're talking about when food hits the ground?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I actually got an article about the 5-second rule, where apparently we don't have enough to study. So we've actually done some high-level university, postgraduate, scientific study to see if the 5-second rule is real. The 5-second rule is that if I drop a piece of food on the ground, as long as I pick it up within 5 seconds, then it's all good. Everything's good. There's no disease or germs or anything. And research now shows that the answer to is the 5-second rule legit is it depends. If you drop something on the tile floor, if you drop something that is slightly moist or that the floor is slightly moist, then you're going to get bacteria on it. If you drop something that is dry nature, or even a little bit of moist on, say, a dry carpet, the 5-second rule is in play. It doesn't attract any bacteria. In other words, it takes moisture on both sides for the attraction to happen. And believe it or not, I knew what we were going to talk about today, and I thought it was a funny article in some ways because I've never really thought much about it. But it is analogous to, so how much contact does it take to be with the wrong people in the wrong places or the wrong ethics or the wrong company, to where, no, you're going to pick up the bacteria. And I don't know. That's kind of what I see happening in Lot's life as well as his family's life. And in his case, of course, it was a lot more than 5 seconds.
That's really good. No, I don't have anything to add to that. I'm just not going to drop my food for more than 5 seconds at least.
Well, we're going to leave off on Genesis 19 and verse 29. We're going to pick up next time to finish the chapter and maybe proceed on to chapter 20. Taking a quick look at it, looks like that's very possible due to the link.
If I could just put a little breadcrumb out there for what we're about to read, what I wrote in my notes about what we're about to read is a desire to conform births enemies.
Say that again.
A desire to conform births enemies.
Oh, wow. That is so insightful. So I'm going to repeat what you just said. A desire to conform will birth enemies. And that right there should be a big enough hook for you to come back and listen, because if you want to know why the world is the way it is, we can point to some of it back in a cave. And we'll leave it there, Winston. Thanks for joining me today on the Today Counts Show.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us on the Today Counts Show. We got so much more planned for you. So stay tuned and stay connected on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. And remember, today counts.